Hello, Cloud Gurus. I'm Drew Fearmont, and welcome to 2022. Congratulations for making it here. You should all be very proud of yourselves. Really excited about the topic for today as we go ahead, and we're much more cautiously optimistic about 2022. So we want to go ahead and talk about some cloud resolutions with some of our cloud experts here. So let's go around and introduce ourselves. Again, I'm Drew Fearmont with A Cloud Guru, now as part of the Pluralsight family, which I'm very excited about. David Tucker.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks, Drew. So I spend a lot of time working across a lot of clouds. I also spend specifically a ton of time in Azure, which I'll be talking some about today, but I help organizations create software in the cloud on a daily basis, as well as creating courses on Pluralsight.
Awesome. Let's go left to right on my radio dial. We'll go to Scott Pletcher next.
Hello, everybody. My name is Scott Pletcher, and I've been kicking around IT for about 29 years. About 2/3 of those years have been in IT leadership management positions in all sorts of different industries. And the past 9 years, I've been involved in migrating companies to the cloud. Now, for the past 3 years, I've been an instructor and a member of the A Cloud Guru family. So I'm a principal community training architect with A Cloud Guru, now part of Pluralsight.
That's awesome, Scott. So you kind of moved from migrating applications to the cloud to now migrating talent to the cloud, which is great to see. So you like that, Mattias. Mattias, I'll turn it over to you next.
Hey, thanks, Drew. Yeah, so my background's in software development, and back in the early 2000s, I was writing code in Microsoft Office, but then I moved on to basically all the different parts of the software development process, and including security, compliance, and of course, cloud architecture stuff. And that's what led me to A Cloud Guru. And I've been teaching a whole bunch of people now for, I guess, I don't know, 5 years or something like that, about AWS and, of course, Google Cloud Platform too. So today I'll be focusing on GCP.
Fantastic. We definitely have the right people on the phone here to be talking about cloud resolutions across 3 of the major cloud providers. And you know, I think we were all very, leaving 2020, going into 2021, we were all very, very excited about 2021, leaving 2020 behind. Unfortunately, 2021 was like, hey, hold my beer. Mayhem ensued and continued to ensue, not only sort of in just the basic, environment that's out there with the pandemic, but, there was a lot of stuff kind of going on within the cloud computing environment too, across all 3, cloud providers, right? And I think that kind of reflecting very quickly on 2021 might set the tone as we move forward here in 2022. So quick playback here, okay? So who remembers back in March, right? Azure, huge AD outage, right? Widespread outage, impacted, Azure is the 2nd largest cloud provider. So, I know my son was very upset when Xbox Live went down and a few other things that were impacted by that. I think most people were excited that, Office went down, but other than that, so it was pretty disruptive. Then we go into April, we got, hey, it wasn't a DNS, it wasn't DNS, yes, and in fact, it was, DNS in April. Pretty large, again, availability issue that caused a lot of failures with, managing Azure services. Not to be outdone, in June, Fastly decided to go ahead and take down the whole internet with their CDN service. I think we all maybe want to repress that, but that was a pretty big impact, pretty much across the board there. Go back to August then, as we kind of make our way through the summer. Azure had to kind of let everybody know that, hey, by the way, thousands of customers have had their data exposed for a couple of years with the Cosmo DB, database, had some vulnerabilities with it. Then we come back with another outage with Azure. Not to be left behind, GCP wanted in on it a little bit. So in November, there was a pretty extensive GCP outage, affected like over 30,000 sites worldwide with a network outage. Then I think really like 4 days later, there was another GCP outage with their load balancing services. So hey, we're not done with 2021 yet. Please get me out of 2021. AWS just decides to fall apart 3 different times in December, just sort of leaving a swath of destruction in its path. And early December for several hours, then followed on the 15th, and then again on the 21st with a host of different issues. And then if we didn't have enough of that, Log4 Shell decided to go ahead and have some vulnerability that pretty much put everybody into a panic heading into the holidays. That was a recap of 2021, right? And then in addition to that, I think we had I counted over 20 different publicly disclosed data breaches with S3 misconfigurations alone, right? So hey, let's look forward to 2022, right? And let's sort of leave that behind. But as we go into 2022, I want to kind of talk about 3 key things and get your expert opinion on what we should be doing, and really kind of this back to the basics around. Let's talk about stability across the 3 cloud providers. What can we do to ensure stability, resiliency and scalability across the cloud as we're doing individual and organizational projects? The second is, we want to be safe, right? Unfortunately, clouds can't be vaccinated necessarily and wear masks. So, we have security to go ahead and keep us safe in the new year. So we want to talk a little bit about that. And maybe a little stretch goal, right? We want to be a little bit optimistic about 2022. And there's a lot of opportunity to go green, be a little bit more eco-friendly, sustainability. While the AWS status page remained green, throughout all of their outages, Kermit the Frog, said, hey, it's not easy being green. So we're going to kind of talk a little bit about what we can do to make it a little bit easier for some of those choices there. So should be fun. I'm excited to hear from the experts here. So let's go ahead and get going. Let's start with the first one here. Stability, right? We had a lot of issues in 2021. Going forward in 2022, what's a few things that individuals and organizations can do to help, be resolved to do a little bit better? David, we'll start off with you with Azure. What's your thoughts here?
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you giving that recap of 2021. And hey, we're already doing better in 2022. And with this, I think a lot of people want to focus on the doom and gloom outages, but I have a little secret for you, and that's, what takes down your applications more than Microsoft, more than AWS, more than Google? You do. So what I want to do for a resolution in 2022 is to say this, that you need to be proactive about monitoring your application's health, because that's one of the keys of stability, is knowing when there are problems. And one of the great things that we saw over the course of 2021 was Microsoft made huge leaps in making it even easier for you to monitor your applications. And what am I talking about here? Well, I'm talking about how we go through and analyze our logs, how we get alerted if our applications are down, how we understand how our application is behaving with other services on Azure that you're using. And those things are made possible by a lot of different services, things, Azure Monitor and Application Insights. And what we can do is we can leverage now several things out of the box, including if you're using .NET or Node or Java, you can actually instrument those applications on app services, for example, with no code changes whatsoever. So there's really virtually no reason to not jump in and to try that. Now you might say, well, those services are great, but I really like using things like, dealing with Prometheus and dealing with Grafana. Great. Microsoft has also made it easier for you to integrate your applications with those services, with connectors that plug right into Azure Monitor. So really here again, we're seeing that, between all of these different services you have, there's really no reason to not dive in and be more proactive, so you can find out when your application isn't working and your customers don't have to be the first one to let you know. So again, 2022, proactively monitor your application health for your applications on Microsoft Azure.
David, I love that. I mean, that's really kind of getting back to the basics, right? I mean, I think everything fails all the time, right, is a pretty decent mantra. I don't know if Mattias or Scott, it was, I think I saw a tattoo that you had with that on it. And obviously monitoring is a key part of it. And, there's a lot of conversations around, not only just monitoring, but eventually kind of getting to observability associated with that. But really the basics. I mean, the cloud providers really all have out of the box monitoring services available, right? That you could kind of just develop some health dashboards and get alerts and things like that. I'm assuming that's true in spades for Azure, David.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've got services like, Azure Monitor Logs, if you want to be able to just process your log information and without you having to go in and set up, a giant Elasticsearch cluster or deal with Prometheus or other things. If you just want to get in, insight into, the tracing of your application, right? You can deal with the application map functionality inside of Azure Monitor, so you can see that, oh, for some reason my calls to Cosmos DB are twice as slow as they usually are, or maybe they're timing out, and then you can use that to know where you should go fix something. And again, like you said, Drew, this is really the first step. If you want to get in and get really complex with your Kubernetes clusters in terms of how you gather information, great, you can absolutely do that. But this initial monitoring is within the reach of anybody that is building a solution that's going to be deployed on Microsoft Azure.
Yeah, I love that because it's very actionable too. I mean, that's a pretty straightforward thing to be able to do, David. Thank you very much, Scott. We're going to move over to AWS. What's your thoughts on your resolution for stability in 2022 on the AWS platform?
Yeah, so what you said, kind of a very famous quote by Werner Vogels, is basically everything breaks all the time. Now, what's important to remember here is this just doesn't happen in the cloud. This happens in any application. This happens in a manufacturing facility. This happens all over, including our own data centers. So we shouldn't look to the cloud as some miraculous, infallible thing that we can just put our workloads on and forget about it, and then rely upon the SLA of the provider, right? So in my younger days, I was an IT operations manager for a while, and I can remember driving into the parking lot of the office complex where our office was and seeing the utility crew out on the street, and they're warming up their backhoe, right? Well, about 50% of the time, they'd managed to cut one of our fiber lines whilst digging around, right? That was just something that happened. Now, of course, we hoped this didn't happen, but hope is not a strategy. So that's why we invested in running redundant fiber paths out of the office complex where we were at, because this stuff happens. And for us, it made sense to invest that little bit of money, in our case, to make sure that we're not going to be at the mercy of the utility crew with the backhoe out by the sidewalk. So now, for example, the December 7th outage, now there are a lot of businesses that did experience downtime, and they probably lost revenue too, while others were relatively unaffected because of how they architected their landscape. And AWS data centers are divided up into availability zones and regions, and availability zones generally are geographically disparate by maybe tens of miles. Regions are separated by hundreds or thousands of miles. And for the most part, regions are relatively self-contained. So problems in one region really rarely impact another region. And that's why it's really important, if you have critical workloads in the cloud, that you're going to look at that and consider, well, what happens if one region fails or goes offline or something like that? How can I gracefully fail over to another region? Our sci-fi minds like to think of this, meteor speeding through space to obliterate a data center, but more likely it's going to be human error or equipment failure or some utility crew with a backhoe out in front of the data center, right? So my resolution around this has been and evaluating our tolerances for outages, and then balancing that with the increased complexity, expense, and peace of mind that multi-region architectures might bring.
Yeah, I love that, Scott. I think it's so one, I feel a little bad bringing up a lot of the issues with 2021 only because it probably creates a lot of fodder for vendors that are being disrupted by cloud computing, especially on-prem vendors that are using that as FUD, or fear, uncertainty, and doubt, to stall folks, cloud adoption, right? And David and Scott, you both have brought up the fact that, look, this stuff happens all the time, probably more often than not in private data centers. It just doesn't happen to get on the news. And the reason why it probably doesn't get on the news is it's very difficult to innovate as quickly in private data centers. So most likely people aren't using your service or your website that's being built out of a private data center, right? So one, is probably a good thing when things go down and people are screaming and hollering that's, hey, you got a good customer base. It's never good to go down, but this isn't a call to say, get out of the cloud. And it's also not a call to say, oh, go multi-cloud and hedge your bets or anything like that, right? Get good at one cloud and create some stability within your environments. And I love the thought of, creating, you first using multiple AZs. If it's not built into the service, then sort of, leverage multiple availability zones, and then start considering, a regional approach as well, or be thoughtful about what region you're going to use. It's a lot of work to move out of the East region, which is encountering a lot of the issues. So again, what's the tolerance for that, and how often does that happen? So Scott, some really good insights on stability within AWS. Very much appreciated. Mattias, as we move to GCP, which encountered some issues as well, but also has some really great momentum going into 2022 as well. What's your thoughts on stability?
Yeah, so I mean, I would echo what David and Scott have already talked about in making sure that you understand what you're actually targeting. That's, I think, one of the really important takeaways. If you don't know what your actual availability is from an end user's perspective, it's really easy to get, I guess, caught up in all of the news cycle of these things are happening, especially if it's not your site, it's maybe something that you were using. But when it comes to your systems, I think it's really important that you sit down and figure out what actually matters and track it so that you have real actual data. Google's operations suite, they used to call it Stackdriver, and now they've got the operations suite and all of the different tools inside of it. So cloud monitoring has a lot of really great stuff inside of it that can help people track what's actually happening in their systems, so that they can see it over time, and so that they can be driving at functional, useful targets. Another quote that Google often talks about is 100% reliability or availability is always the wrong target. And they hedge that back just a little bit because, of course, life critical systems, there are a few things out there. But in general, if you think that you need 100% uptime, you're wrong. And so that perspective of going and engineering a target and a system that meets that target is such an important thing. That they really call it out as the core thing in site reliability engineering, which Google's, of course, known for. I happened to bring this book out because I was flipping through before this, just thinking about some of these topics, and they in their chapter 2 for the site reliability workbook. They talk about how, in many ways, this is the most important chapter of the book because it's all about implementing the service level objectives, understanding what you're actually targeting. And there's a whole bunch of discussion that actually you should probably go and read, because this book and the site reliability engineering book, they're free online. But they finish off this discussion of service level indicators and service level objectives by saying your first attempt at an SLI and SLO doesn't have to be correct. The most important goal is to get something in place and measured, and to set up a feedback loop so you can improve. And really, I think that's what you've got to do. So take a look at setting up an SLI, which actually is really easy to do in cloud monitoring. and then turn it into an SLO, a service level objective, where you've got some sort of a target. Even if you're not 100% sure on what it should be, just go with it. Google will automatically calculate your error budget for you, show you how you're doing against that particular target, and then you can iterate on that over time. So you can have real information of how to move forward. So that's really, I think, the key takeaway from a Google Cloud perspective. But to take one more step back, of another sort of tip is that a lot of the problems, as was also already mentioned, a lot of the problems are the ones that we cause, right? They're the ones that are caused by the cloud providers are they're more newsworthy in general, but we're the ones that are causing a lot of the problems. And so I think it's really important actually to take advantage of the managed and serverless services. So instead of going, oh, well, let's get more control, it's actually giving up that responsibility and saying, you know, Google actually runs those things much better than I do. And it comes up in a lot of other circumstances as well, that they can do a better job of stability and other factors when we are taking advantage of higher abstractions. So if you're running containers, maybe consider running it in Cloud Run, because then you're giving up more of that that control and therefore more of that responsibility. Google can manage all of the servers that are needed for that. Take advantage of the options that are available in different services. But so Cloud Run, Google Cloud Storage, if you're doing messaging, Cloud PubSub, take a look at those things and how they can fit into your architecture. I think that's definitely an important takeaway.
You got some really great points. The first one on, there's DevOps was such a hot topic and still continues to be one of the most searched on terms on A Cloud Guru, along with a lot of the orchestration tools. But certainly site reliability engineering is really kind of a whole nother level in terms of where things are going. And Google has done a great job establishing really that discipline. And beyond the book, by the way, because I don't know if you're even aware of this, but we have some really great content at A Cloud Guru related to site reliability engineering for those folks that already have a subscription, but certainly worth checking out. I learned a lot kind of going through there and kind of getting back to the basics and being, an SRE, there's a lot to it. DevOps tends to be a little bit more around the culture, the idea of automation, a lot of the, there's some measurements and sharing, but it tends to be more around bringing ops and dev together, where site reliability engineering, that definitely seems to be much more of a discipline. I loved your second, kind of point there, which is, hey, let these cloud providers take care of some of that undifferentiated heavy lifting, right? I don't really like the term no code. I kind of like the idea of low code. Like any line of code that you write is a liability, and really any type of server that you're running out there is also a liability. I recently mentioned that serverless probably should have been called less servers to be a little bit more less sort of antagonistic, and really kind of the idea, like our goal is to really, like, who wants to run more servers? The whole idea is to try to let the cloud providers take care of that for you. So I love.
If you're going to wade into the topic of defining serverless, maybe we should schedule a series of 10 follow-up webinars.
I think my resolution for 2022 is try not to get any holy wars between Kubernetes and serverless and everything else, and just focus on outcomes and not sort of terminology. But I do love those resolutions and your thoughts on that as well. Any other, before we kind of head on to the next topic around security, I just want to make sure, David and Scott, was there anything else that you wanted to mention regarding the importance of stability and resolutions in 2022 for both individuals and organizations?
Well, one of the things I would bring up, just to further what Mattias said here, and it's true on Azure just as much as it's true on GCP, is, again, the best infrastructure is the infrastructure you don't have to manage. So the ability that you have to leverage services, right? I think, again, we often see, this is one of the big challenges when I go in and work with companies, is they immediately move to the most complex service. And I think here in 2022, a great kind of sub-resolution would be, move to the service that meets your needs and provides the minimum amount of maintenance for what you're doing. So you might need AKS, you might be able to use ACI, right, for your containers. You might be able to use app service. It just depends on what you need to do. But again, the less you manage, the more time you get to spend adding new value for your organization.
And just to add to that, if you're going to take something on yourself, it actually had better be a long-term decision, because you're taking on the long-term cost of that, not just the right now, what does it support? It's a you're on the hook for then building in the extra functionality that you're going to need, or maintaining it in all these different ways. So from my perspective, it needs to be a much stronger case to build something on our own than just using something. But sorry, go ahead, Scott.
I was just going to reiterate managed services. I think that's one of the things that just, AWS has plenty of managed services. And that's the most beautiful thing in the world, because you just use that service. And in many cases, it's already multi availability zone, or in some cases, it's multi-region, and it takes care of all that for you. So you don't even have to worry about that. So really investigate before you decide to, plop VMs down on certain instances there. Then look at some of the managed services.
Yeah, I love that. So kind of the themes for the resolution, one is less is more. So try to actually deprecate as much of the liability that exists out there. Reduce your surface area, move it over to managed services. And then what you do have out there, make sure you're establishing the right level of service, and also the ability to monitor that service as well. So some really good resolutions. Scott, you had mentioned before around some of the services that are out there are in fact not only just multiple AZ, but multi-region. You don't hear much about S3 going down from a stability perspective, but as I mentioned before, you certainly hear about as we move into security here and our resolutions for that, misconfigurations associated with S3 leading to data breaches. So, when you talk about some resolutions for 2022, Scott, I'll start off with you. And with AWS, do you have anything in mind from a resolution perspective to help folks be more secure in 2022?
Sure. So 2021 brought yet more embarrassing data exposures thanks to misconfigured S3 buckets. And now it's really tempting to blame AWS for just creating a shoddy product, but nothing could be further from the truth. S3's been around forever, and it is very robust. And it is one of the cornerstone services that most companies make use of when they start using AWS, be it for maybe offsite data backup storage, or maybe archiving or something like that. S3 by default is really, really secure. Your data is private from the get-go. Now, the trouble comes in when we humans start trying to make things simpler by opening up access. And sometimes we open it up a little too widely without knowing it, because maybe we made a mistake, or maybe we don't have the proper training, or whatever. Now, critics claim that AWS just made S3 too easy to configure, which I guess forces us hapless masses to make bad decisions, if that's the line of thinking that you want to go down. But in response to that criticism, AWS has added yet more disclaimers and yet more configuration and confirmation steps along the S3 configuration path, which really they're just annoyances for those who know what they're doing, and they're also annoyances for those who really don't know what they're doing, because when they confirm something, a lot of times they don't really know what the implications of what they're trying to confirm actually is. So for 2022, my resolution is around encouraging everyone, please go out there and audit your S3 buckets. Now you can use AWS Trust Advisor, you can use AWS config rules, or you can just browse through the console. And there's a lot of good information on the console where you can see your buckets, and then if there's any potential public objects contained in that bucket. And if that's not what you intended, well, you need to fix that. So probably the most important thing, though, is if you're creating new buckets, just walk away. Don't touch it. Leave them alone. They are secure by default. And on the A-Cloud Guru platform, we have several good resources that can help you secure your S3 buckets and really learn kind of that fine-grained control over S3, which is a really marvelous tool for cloud usage, cloud adoption. It's very cost effective, it's very highly redundant, and it's very stable. So my resolution would be, please go out there, audit your buckets. And if you create new buckets, try not to mess with them too much.
Yeah, it's like with great power comes great responsibility with some of these services, right? And we do have I'm really very excited about all these hands-on environments that we have, specifically if folks can go in a safe environment, right? You can just click and spin up an AWS or GCP or Azure console and actually start building these services and really kind of learn how to make sure everything is secure. And of course, securing an S3 bucket is probably our easiest lab, because you just basically turn on an S3 bucket and then you just walk away and it's secure, right? So that's the 30-second lab for that. So Scott, great insights with that. David, I'll turn it over to you from a security perspective on Azure. I mean, there's not much we can do with allowing folks access to the control plane through a vulnerability there, but there are things that we can do in terms of as we're designing and architecting our applications on Azure to make sure that they are secure. So what's your thoughts on that? What's your resolution for 2022?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like you mentioned, a lot of people want to immediately jump to those things like the Cosmos DB vulnerability. But again, the truth here, just like with the previous resolution we talked about, your biggest risk if you're building an application is you. It's how you do it, how you choose to implement it. And we talked in the last resolution as well about, don't own things that you don't need to own. And one of the problems that we've seen is that a lot of people that are building solutions on Azure, whether you're doing just something, maybe just something lightweight and Azure functions, whether you're using app service or even if you're using AKS, is people are mishandling application secrets, which in sometimes it's going to be connection strings that might potentially have access to your data. It might be API keys that get you into a third-party service that has also some of your data. And so if you're wanting to be secure, you don't want to have to own keeping those secrets secure. And one of the great things that we can leverage here is Azure Key Vault. And here's the great thing. You want to use Azure Functions? Integrated. You want to use app service? It's integrated there too, right? You want to run an ACI? Perfect. It's in there. You want to run an AKS? Yep, it actually has an adapter to work with that too. You want to do logic apps? It's integrated with that through a connector. So basically any compute capability that you have on Azure, you can integrate in with Azure Key Vault. And here's one of the great things. Let's say you're a brand new developer, you're building something out there on Azure and you think, oh, I'm just going to use this service and I'm going to store my secrets in there. Great. Now, if it blows up down the road and you need to hit some levels of compliance or other things because your thing is just so popular and you've got people knocking down your door, you're going to get the ability of using these HSMs or hardware security modules that are built into Azure Key Vault by default. And that's going to be things that are required for handling a lot of different types of data. And you just get out of the box because you're using a service that Microsoft has totally configured for this purpose. And again, this is valid for connection strings, API keys, encryption keys, which again are so critical when we're talking about security if you're managing your own encryption keys. So again, I would just highly encourage you. So in 2022, take control of your application secrets, because let's be honest, if I had $1 for every time that somebody uploaded an application secret to GitHub, I'd be broadcasting from like Fiji right now. So I'm just throwing that out there.
Love it, love it. It sounds like that's the appropriate, like the 6 feet of social distancing equivalent there, right? So I love that in order to stay safe on Azure. That's really good advice there. Mattias, with GCP, what's your resolution for security to keep our workloads safe and secure in Google platform?
Yeah, well, I would say that, so just putting it out there for other people, if they're looking at what they're running on GCP, or me as well, but use projects to limit your blast radius for one, and then don't only embrace least privilege, make it a reality. And you can use the IAM recommender to do that. So the first thing there, if you're using GCP, I'm sure you already know about how projects contain all of the resources that you make, right? But don't overlook how valuable it is as a tool for organized things for security as well. That's really one of the key takeaways, I think. A GCP project limits the blast radius in a similar way to an entire AWS account does. And so it can be a really good way to take advantage of separating things that shouldn't be together, and making sure that if something goes wrong in one scope, it doesn't affect other ones. And it's not a lot of management hassle for that. So I just wanted to mention, pardon me, I just wanted to mention that one quickly. But the second thing I wanted to mention is about the IAM recommender, because the IAM recommender is all about helping us achieve the principle of least privilege. And the principle of least privilege, I think, is the most important and still straightforward idea in all of security, that you don't take more access than you need. You don't give more access than you need. You don't use more power than you need for the circumstance, least privilege. And so to put that into practice, we should take a look at the different things that we're doing, the people that we give access, or the service accounts that we give access. We should make sure that the access that are granted to those is what they need to be able to function properly, but not more. And so the IAM recommender, it will show unused permissions with virtually no effort. So it's a really great tool to just pop in there and take a look at stuff. It'll already manage the access logs and analyze them for you, and then it'll just pop up a, hey, there are 400 permissions granted to this particular user in this role, but they're only using 6 of them. So you might actually instead want to grant this other role. And the other roles that it's recommending is actually a smart recommendation based on how people in your organization are using different roles. So that person will wind up getting the permission that they need, not just chopped down to something that they didn't happen to use this week, because we all know that that's not the way that things happen, right? We have certain capabilities that we might need to use every once in a while, and that's why they're bundled into roles. So in any case, that's I think a really valuable tool that if you're not already using it, you should be. So.
Yeah, I love that. I love, Mattias, what you're saying there, and I'd be interested in the feedback from Scott and David as well, because a lot of the cloud providers, the cloud providers now are coming out with more of these recommendation engines. I think, Scott, you mentioned like Trusted Advisor before, and I'm assuming they're really kind of using some internal machine learning logic and things like that to start to collect some data and understand. I think AWS has leveraged the Cloud Gurus sort of nomenclature, and now is like Code Guru or DevOps Guru that are doing some of those things to look for some automated checks and balances. Leveraging those out of the box, certainly, understanding the cost of those, I guess, as well is important. But kind of leveraging those, especially the ones that are free, are really important to understand. Scott, from an AWS perspective, Trusted Advisor seems to be the one that kind of pops to mind that folks should be really leveraging as much as possible.
Yeah, that's one of those things that I think maybe a lot of people, when they first jump into AWS, are not really aware of what it is. And it's basically just it's a screening tool almost. It'll analyze your resources and give you suggestions, which is really kind of cool. So I would highly recommend, being aware of that as a thing, and then using all the tools that are there. I mean, the cloud providers want you to be secure, because if you're not, then that's, egg on your face and egg on their face too, because this whole shared responsibility model, and that's an important concept when you're thinking about the cloud. It's not just the cloud provider's responsibility to keep you safe. You have an important responsibility too. So learn these tools, make use of these tools regularly, especially if you happen to find yourself in a regulated industry or something like that. It's really important. And all these cloud providers that we're talking about today have built lots of tools because they want to be well known and well used in those various industries, be it pharmaceuticals or government work or whatever, right? So chances are, if you're in a regulated industry, there's probably a specific tool to help you out there and satisfy your auditors and make everybody happy. So that's my advice there, is, explore some of these things that maybe you don't hear about right off the bat, but they're out there and the cloud providers want you to use them.
David, was there a similar one from Azure perspective, as like the Trusted Advisor or recommendation engine, that folks should be taking a look at?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and again, we know that a lot of times cloud providers have similar names. So we have Azure Advisor. So Azure Advisor is going to give you a lot of those same kinds of recommendations. And again, I know people that are building on Azure. Sometimes, some people are really focused on those, and sometimes people think almost in times they know a little better than some of those recommendations. I think everybody should go into their cloud workloads and spend time looking at all the recommendations. One of the great things that I like about Azure Advisor is you can go in, and if it gives you an alarm, maybe it's something you don't want to tackle right away. Maybe it is something you can just hit the quick fix option and it's done, but you also can just postpone those so you can come back and take a look at them later. One of the cool things that you also get with this is you get an overall score. Just how are you doing with your cloud workloads in terms of following the recommendations that Microsoft has across several different areas, which are actually similar to what the other cloud providers do also. So again, it is a great tool. Everyone should go in, no matter whether you've been doing this for 6 years or this is day 6 for you. Go in and take a look at the recommendations that are included in Azure. Make sure that you understand the recommendations they have there, and the ones that you can act on quickly, just do it, because those recommendations are, again, like Scott and Mattias said, they're based off of the cumulative experience that the cloud provider has in terms of quality workloads on their platform.
Yeah, I think doing the fundamentals right, and, you're never done learning the fundamentals, right? Somebody was mentioned to me the other day about golfing. It's like once you learn your golf grip, then you realize how much you don't know because it's constantly evolving and changing, and so you're always working on the golf grip. And you think if you mastered it, well, then you're probably more of a hazard, and you're going to end up in the hazard, right? But I think there is a lot of complexity associated with this because Scott, you mentioned the shared responsibility model. And that can be pretty confusing because it's like the line changes a little bit from cloud provider to cloud provider. They all have their their different slant on it. But ultimately, there is something that they're responsible for, certainly like the security of the actual premises themselves. But where does that sort of line change? It's going to be a little bit different. So really kind of educating yourself on the cloud that you're working on. And leveraging these tools and really looking at these recommendations will probably give you some good insights on that.
And it
Mattias, go
also
ahead.
changes a lot service to service, actually. So depending on what level of the abstraction stack you're targeting, you could be responsible for way more of that security. And that's actually one of the things that, again, we get value from giving up that responsibility because we can choose a service that's more managed. They're managing those deeper layers for us. But it's shared responsibility, not no responsibility. We're giving up a lot of responsibility, not all responsibility. So we still have to take responsibility for our part in it. And I think that's the theme that people have been echoing, right?
Oh, come on. I have responsibility in 2022. Come on. Let's it's enough. I'm done with it. So there's no code. Now I want no responsibility. Whoever comes up with that service, I'm all about it. And I really liked your other talk. You mentioned limiting the blast radius. I think that's such a fundamental, so important of a concept. I remember when I was, at Capital One, and I really kind of looked at the blast radius as a way to really start to separate divisions. So the banking division versus, the credit card division versus another division. And really, even thinking about it at that level, we, made huge strides because we were spending most of our weekends trying to deconflict releases that were happening within the data center from application releases. And you had this whole theater of release management and the whole change control board, which was a nightmare. It's like this air traffic control, and there was, telling people they're grounded or they're not able to, go on their flight. It was just a complete disaster for years in this sort of ITIL process, right? Then along comes the cloud, and you're like, hey, you can actually release what you want with no dependencies on what somebody else is doing, and you're under your own control, and you're kind of managing your destiny, which was great. And I remember somebody mentioning to me at the time, hey, what we really need to be doing is taking that blast radius down to the application level. And I was like, get out of here, man, that's crazy talk. Like, that is just so complex. Why we want to be able to manage that many accounts and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, well, infrastructure as code, and managing, accounts should be the same way. You're basically this whole idea of cattle and, pets and cattle. It's like, well, you're treating your accounts now like pets. And realistically, they should be just as ephemeral. And it really has taken a long time for that to sort of establish itself. Obviously, the cloud providers have made it a little bit easier. GCP has embraced that right from the beginning with projects. I'm interested to hear, Scott and David, from your side on AWS and Azure, that concept of limiting blast radius. How do you see that manifesting itself? And is that something that folks should be really kind of out of the gates, starting to have it down to a very granular level? Scott, I'll start off with you with AWS.
All right. How dare you disparage ITIL? How dare you? Come on. All right. But we'll put that aside.
And then let's talk about the CMM model as well. We can really have a lot of fun with some PowerPoint charts.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So blast radius is a real thing on AWS just as well, and there's ways that you can really granularize your applications. And I think one of the things that we try to do when maybe we first go into the cloud is we start designing these architectures that kind of mimic our on-prem monolithic big data center, computer room, rack type architectures. And the reality is we don't really need to think like that anymore. I mean, the traditional might be that you'd have this network here, and then you have it protected and walled off by firewalls or proxies or whatever, right? Well, we can actually apply firewalls and proxies down to the individual service level, which is really very handy, because then you know exactly what's going in and what's going out of your particular applications. We can also be sure that none of our traffic ventures out into the public areas of the AWS network. So we can basically, in essence, create little channels, back alley channels between our applications, and that's a really efficient and useful way to protect your assets on the AWS network. So there's many ways of kind of compartmentalizing your applications, but again, this is something that just isn't. It just doesn't maybe come to you if you're going into the cloud brand new, which is why it's really important to get the training, or find experienced architects, or upskill your own staff so that they're fluent in this conversation and they know what's possible. And then you're going to end up with a more efficient, better product.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think, by the way, a class recommendation from Mark Nunikoven at Mastering the Well-Architected Framework, one of my favorites, just to kind of really understand the fundamentals of how to be approaching and thinking about leveraging these services and putting these Lego pieces together. And a lot of the things that we're talking about here with resiliency, scalability, and security, and those pillars, which is definitely applicable across all the cloud providers. David, when it comes to blast radius and Azure, anything that folks should be considering or really kind of thinking about out of the gate as they're building these workloads?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a couple different levels we can talk about this, and we can talk about it. Okay, let's talk about the application level, right? And that's where we start to think about how we modularize what we create, so that we actually create these points again where different parts of our application can talk to one another. And if for some reason one of those pieces blows up, we don't actually potentially totally break down our entire workflow. And so I would encourage new developers especially to be sure that they understand the different Azure messaging services. Go in and look at Event Grid, look at Service Bus, understand what's there and when you would use one versus the other. Microsoft has a ton of great resources that help walk you through that on when you would use one of those, but that can help you provide really that isolation at the application level. But then we also have, again, we talked about totally separating out in separate experiences. One of the things we're having to deal with now, and I know maybe this is bigger for some cloud providers than others, but we're still talking here about this hybrid cloud reality that we're going into. And so we're also needing to think about potentially how our own data centers factor into that limiting the blast radius discussion. And we could spend, that's a whole other webinar, so we won't go too deep into that right now. But I think organizations need to think about, how do I separate my workloads, whether again it's the application level or entire experiences, completely, so that you do have the ability to track and adjust and change if something isn't behaving as it should. And again, and depending on how complex you want to make it, there's a lot of different services that apply that you could integrate in to help deal with those specific issues.
All right, so look, we got through stability and we got through security here, and what's I think the key takeaway for folks here is that both individuals and organizations each of the cloud providers have a lot of different services that you can leverage to ensure some basic stability, to ensure your security. A lot of it's managed services, a lot of it's out of the box. Get to know them very well in 2022 to make sure that we can all get out of 2022, safely, securely, and actually start to generate some revenue with our customers as our sites are up, right? Continue to service our customers with your features and your products. From a stretch goal perspective, we all want to be doing this in a little bit more eco-friendly way. A lot of stuff in the press around just the massive power consumptions going on within these data centers, even especially as they get consolidated and they're leveraging these economies of scales that we're benefiting from. But that's a double-edged sword as well. So a lot of focus is being placed on being a little bit more eco-friendly or creating some sustainability with these cloud providers. And there's a little bit of catch-up going on between these cloud providers. I think GCP has kind of been out in front from early on. Azure really kind of came in and started doing some creating some visibility. And now I think Adrian Cockcroft and a few others are really leading the charge, not only within AWS, but really from, at Amazon on down though. So as an individual, right? I know when I go into a hardware store and I could pick up an LED light or a fluorescent light and I could kind of look at, the different utilization, it's very easy for me to select on what I want. When I go into a cloud provider and I want to spin up a VM, is there a little green leaf next to it or an indicator that tells me, how green it's going to be, or how do I make the right choices, going forward? Mattias, I'll go ahead and I'll start off with you with GCP. What can I do to be more eco-friendly and sustainable within 2022 in the cloud?
Well, just right off the bat, I'll answer your question. Yes, there's a little green leaf on the region picker. I have 3 green leaves means it's a more eco-friendly region, but so that's one of the things, as an example, that Google's trying to do to improve awareness and let people to make better choices that align more with what they're trying to accomplish. Now, Google often talks about how they're the greenest cloud, and I know you mentioned that they've been green for a while, and they've since actually 2017 they've been completely carbon neutral. And so basically everything that's running on GCP is carbon neutral, and they have 100% renewable energy for all their regions. But that's just the net. So they're paying for offsets for that, right? But it's more than that, because we also care about the gross carbon impact. So there are some things that we can do about that as well. And so we can take a look at how the different workloads that we build are being are impacting the usage of carbon-based electrical generation. So Google is actually targeting to be completely carbon-free 24/7 by 2030. But if what we do is we take a look at the new carbon footprint product that they have, that can really give us a lot of insight into what's going on in our actual workloads. So they give us information about how the different ways that we've structured our workloads are impacting the carbon usage, the electricity costs, and all of the whole chain. In fact, you can use that tool to basically export a whole bunch of data, and you can dig into it with BigQuery, analyze it to figure out where you're costing the most carbon, basically, so that you can switch your architectures around. And interestingly, this actually ties so much into a lot of the other things that we've been talking about, because I think that when we switch around our architectures to take advantage of more managed services, we hand some of that responsibility to Google to manage the sustainability of that. And so instead of us creating, I don't know, some sort of a virtual machine that sits there because we want a file server, and most of the time it's not being used, and then when it's used a lot, it's overloaded, and we have to manage the security of it, and it dies, and we don't have a backup for it. And because it's idle, it's using a whole lot more electricity than it should be, and there's no way that Google can know, because of how we've structured that workload, that machine doesn't need to be running. If instead we just ask Google, hey, look, cloud storage, you served this file for me, thank you very much. From that point on, Google can manage all of that across their entire set of customers. And so what we can do is take advantage of better services that wind up being more stable, more secure, less work, and oh look, they're also more sustainable, right? So I think that that's one of the interesting things to take a look at. But the carbon footprint tool is definitely a good one to dig into if you've got existing workloads that you can't re-architect right away, especially because they'll give you information then about which pieces should be re-architected earlier versus later as you're trying to achieve sustainability goals.
I feel a little bit more optimistic about going into 2022 after hearing you talk about that. So, that's all great signs. Kermit was right about, it's not easy being green, but it sounds like GCP is certainly doing and has been doing a lot of the right things in that space. David, I know Azure also, you have a lot of passion behind this, and we were talking about this for quite some time, and this is actually this topic probably warrants its own webinar or conversation, because there's really a lot to click into here. But David, if you want to give me some resolutions of what individuals, organizations on Azure can do to be more sustainable, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was crazy if we just take a quick look back in 2021 that in all three of the major conferences that focused on the cloud, sustainability was probably the one thing that was the common thread across all of them. And so last year was really the inflection point for getting things started. Now, some of you might be listening to this and you might say, oh, are you telling me there's something else I've got to work into my planning and workflows for 2022? It just seems like we're always just piling more on. And I'm going to tell you that I think this one is a little bit different. And I think part of the reason that this is different is I think this is actually eventually, like long term, is going to change the way that organizations build solutions in the cloud. Now, in the short term, I don't think you have to get all crazy about that in 2022. What I do think you need to do, and the resolution that I have, is if you're building within Azure, is you can go in and get just a baseline of your carbon footprint here at the beginning of the year. As Peter Drucker is famous for saying, right, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. So you're going to need to know how you're doing in this. And so Microsoft provided, it was initially called the Sustainability Calculator. Now it's called the Emissions Impact Dashboard. They allow you to go in and get basic information around your carbon footprint. And they go into a ton of details on how they calculate it and all that. If you want that level of detail, they have that. Now, I will say, I think the experience here is a little bit lacking. This is a Power BI Pro application, so you have to have a Power BI Pro subscription to be able to go in and get your data and analyze it. That's not necessarily great. I think eventually this will become a full-fledged first-class service within Azure, so you can really keep track of this and alert on it and other things. But again, we're taking baby steps to get there, and I think we're going to see a lot of changes that happen. We've already seen Microsoft talk a lot about their last three regions, so West US 3 out in Arizona, Norway, and Belgium. All have seen sustainability be a huge push in how those were constructed. So I think Microsoft is going to continually provide more information so you can make smart choices, especially around the regions and the services that you use. But again, it's 2022, just get your baseline. I think if you're able to do that and get that initial data, that will help you as you start to map toward 2023 and thinking about what can you do to really take it to the next level and really optimize what you're doing within Microsoft Azure.
Well, it sounds like both in GCP and in Azure, you could at least establish a baseline and get some sense of where you are, so you know how much greener can I be, what other choices can I make, what's my emissions impact. Scott, with AWS, I know they recently announced within their well-architected framework, they're adding sustainability as a pillar. Now that shows up in a white paper. I'm kind of interested, what shows up in the console or making to help, individuals and organizations make informed decisions, as you're hearing from both, Azure and GCP.
Sure. So sustainability is a big topic nowadays, and I think at one point it used to be somewhat of maybe a moral imperative. But now it's being pulled into an economic imperative for a lot of organizations. Many large organizations now have board level oversight of environmental, social, and governance. And sustainability has become just as common of a negotiating attribute in a supplier contract as maybe price or quality. So these things are actually, where they didn't used to, they are spilling over absolutely into the economic fabric of our economies, and for good reason, because if you think about things long term, sustainability is something that we all, I think, can get behind, but not just necessarily from the environmental aspect. The more efficient we are, the less it's going to cost. So as you said, in 2021, AWS introduced the sustainability pillar as part of their well-architected framework, which is a framework of how it's kind of best practices of how an organization might want to kind of conceptualize or think about their cloud architecture. And it covers, this sustainability pillar covers everything from power utilization to, is the code that you're writing as efficient as it could be? Do you really need that loop in that code to wait for something to happen? So one way companies are creating more environmentally friendly applications is by re-architecting over to serverless. And we kind of talked about it before. It doesn't mean there's no servers, but what I'm talking about there is more event-based type applications. So instead of having this server kind of waiting around all day for it to be called 3 times, then you're more event-based, and you only use that CPU cycle when you need it, which is way more efficient. And theoretically, it should cost you way less than running a server full time. Now, another area, right, for sustainability is machine learning. And this is kind of a dirty little secret that not too many people like to talk about, is all these great machine learning models that do all these fantastic things. They require lots and lots of data and lots of computing power to produce these models that can simulate human intelligence. So one of the things that AWS has done is investing in some in-house custom chips that are more efficient than the commercially available chips out there at doing these machine learning things. They're more purpose-built. And there's several other examples of AWS building kind of these specific purpose-built type hardware, which is great, because in those cases, if it's more efficient and it may have higher performance because it's more specific purpose-built to a certain function, it's going to end up costing us less. And AWS has definitely kind of handed over some of that savings as part of a motivating factor to attract new business to say, hey, I want to run my workloads on AWS, these special machine learning chips, because net they're cheaper and they're more sustainable and more efficient. So my 2022 resolution about my AWS workloads is to really review my landscape through the lens of this sustainability pillar, because not just for environmental reasons, but also for, in many cases, I think I can probably save some money by maybe doing some things differently, or at least architecting, or maybe using some more specific purpose-built hardware than I am right now.
I love it, and definitely some common themes there about the managed services. And then it's really great to see, to be honest with you, this competitive pressure amongst GCP and Microsoft and Amazon, sort of this positive peer pressure, and us as consumers of those services, I think, are all benefiting, and certainly love to see the climate benefit as well, as we get a little bit more efficient in our consumption and how things are built. So I really appreciate your insights here. I think that these are very solid and pragmatic, back to basic resolutions for 2022 across each of the cloud providers. We talk about how to be more stable, how to be more secure, and then our stretch goal with being sustainable. My resolution is to follow you all a little bit closer and listen to your contributions to the community. You have a lot of great insights across the different cloud providers. I know you have a lot in store in 2022 to share these additional insights with our community. So really looking forward to hearing that and being a part of it. And for all the gurus that are working on the cloud that are watching here, and hopefully you had a chance to enjoy it and take something away. And wishing you all the best in 2022, and we'll be catching up with you soon. Until then, keep being awesome, Cloud Gurus.
Yeah, awesome.